Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 55 in the podcast series. This one I'm calling Playbor. You know, play plus labor. It's one of these funny, like, academic things, but I think it'll be fun for us to talk about as a theme for this episode. So, I'm coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, where it is a sunny Sunday afternoon, and I happen to be a professor at the university over there. So I podcast, if you're new, this is a podcast about garment design and modification, usually a little bit of spinning here and there. And if you like those things, you're in the right place. You can find me just about everywhere as Knitting the Stash, on YouTube, obviously, and on Instagram and Ravelry, and on the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. And about a week ago, I actually gave a presentation to my guild, which is the Champaign-Urbana Spinners and Weavers Guild. And they asked me to come and talk about podcasting. So it was great. I got to go in and talk about this podcast, and I got to introduce them to the world of podcasting, and share with them a bunch of my favorite podcasters and kind of like get them going on this. Some of them knew about podcasts, and some of them just had never even considered that there was this other content out there. You know, video recordings and digital stuff that you can made by people who you can just kind of hang out with while you're knitting. So a lot of them said to me after the meeting that they were really excited to find new content and new people, and so that was a really fun presentation. We tried to film it, but the room was dark so that they could see my slides, so it didn't really come out super great. So I thought I'd be able to share it with you more directly, but not so much. So you just get to hear about it, and it was a fun time. And let's see what else has been going on. And what else should I tell you? I'm not even wearing any knitwear today because it's so warm outside. It's like 70 degrees, and we have been all over the place this weekend. I was at Greencastle yesterday, the fiber event at Greencastle, where my guild mates and I did a kind of like test run demo of a sheep to shawl for what we're gonna do in Wisconsin coming up in September. So we were like, well, Greencastle doesn't have a sheep to shawl, but we're going to be there anyway, and if our team can all be in one place and we can demo spinning and weaving and all that kind of good stuff for the crew that comes out to the Greencastle Fiber Event, why not? So we got a little booth area, and there were 7 of our 8 team members were able to be there. Sue wasn't there. Sue, we miss you. And we had, Beth had already spun a hand-spun warp for the loom, and Lisa, our weaver, wove with a weft that we went from fleece to fiber with, or fleece to yarn with, and it was a beautiful, I think it was a border luster, that's what it was. So this thing had some spring. It was really fine, beautiful Shetland fleece for the hand spun, and fine, beautiful border luster for the weft. And that thing came out so gorgeous. It was a very subtle kind of weaving, and I'll try to put some pictures in here as I'm talking about the team and the event and our final shawl. And we actually finished. We kind of went by the Wisconsin rules, so we finished about 15 minutes before our time, which is 4 hours of time with a half-hour lunch break. So it's actually 4.5 hours. And we finished early, but we were a little bit short on our weaving. So we've got to fix that, and it's good. We've got plenty of time before Wisconsin, so we can fix that error. And I think it's going to be a beautiful shawl for that contest. So I'm pretty excited to go out to Wisconsin and participate in the sheep to shawl out there this coming fall. So that's what we did yesterday. And then at the end, I was riding with Kathy of Seven Sisters Farms, and she's the one I got the fleece from this year for the next yarn that's happening. The next farm to skein yarn. And when we got back to her house, she said, "Do you want to feed some baby lambs?" And I said, "How could you say no?" So I got to go out and feed Fiona, who is my little lap lamb buddy. She sits with me at spinning. She sat with me at spinning for 2 hours that one day, and I just fell in love with her. So I got to feed her kind of afternoon meal, and she was really adorable. She's growing. She's getting so big and strong. We were worried about her, but she's getting to be really strong now, and she's really cute. So I'll put a little picture in here of her and me when she was a lot younger, but still just as cute. So that was yesterday, and the other thing that's happening in our lives right now is, before I get to the knitting, is that we are moving. Whoa. Moving, like totally moving house. It took us 3 or 4 or 5 years to find a place with some acreage, and we finally did. It's in the school district where my son goes, so that's all good. And it has 5 acres, a barn, a workshop, a fenced-in yard for our 2 dogs. So we are pretty excited, and that is going to happen in June. And in the meantime, we're kind of starting to pack up the house to put it on the market. So this has been a little bit of a whirlwind. I don't usually talk to you guys this much at the beginning of an episode, but there's some stuff going on. And so what that means is that when I podcast for the next month or so, it'll probably be a little bit sparse because things are disappearing from my yarn room. Like my stash is no longer here, and my books are all packed up, and I'm a little bit like, oh, where's all my gear? I don't know. But it's so far so good, and I think we're gonna be able to make it to get the house all ready and out of here. But it is the end of the semester, and it is crazy time. So thanks for listening so long. I usually don't talk about what's going on with us so much, but it's kind of like a lot, and I feel like I want you guys to know if I seem a little dazed and confused, or if the podcast is a little late coming out, or it's not quite what it usually is in terms of content. Just please know that we've got some other things going on. So yeah, and hopefully I'll be able to podcast from the farm. We're calling it our little farm, 5 acres, soon, and that'll be really fun to share with you guys all the new trees and land. And I'm kind of hoping we could get sheep, but I don't know because we travel so much. Anyway, so let me get on to the episode. I've blabbered a lot about what's going on with us. So in this episode, I want to tell you a little bit about this sweater, which is not quite done, as you can tell by the knitting needles that are sitting at the top here. This is the Lila Now sweater by French Press Knits, and French Press Knits is Melinda Bernardi. And I'll tell you a little bit about that sweater. I've got, instead of a book, because all my books are packed up, I have a really cool Scientific American article for you from the 19th century about shepherds, and I have an announcement about the giveaway for Making Stories that we featured on the podcast last time. So lots of good stuff, and hopefully we'll get to talk about Playbor a little bit at the end. So Lila Now, let me tell you about this beauty. This is an all-over colorwork sweater. I think a lot of people talk about this as like a bird's eye kind of design, because it's 3 main color stitches and then 1 contrast color stitch, and you're kind of like alternating them as you go up to create this kind of pattern. And I'm knitting this for the Wool and Honey yarn shop up in Michigan. This will be the 3rd sweater I've knit for them, but I also did a scarf, and I feel like I did something else, but anyway, it's been a nice relationship with them because they send me beautiful yarn and fun patterns, and I get to knit them up as samples, and then send them off so they can do something else with them in another life. So this sweater is bottom up, but it is raglan, so it's relatively seamless. The only real seams are going to be these armpits where I'll need to do a little Kitchener stitch grafting. And you do the bottom up for the body, bottom up for the sleeves, and then you join everything and work in the round, and you create these raglan lines, which you can kind of see right here. Yeah. It doesn't quite fit on my mannequin. This is a size 44 that I'm knitting. My mannequin is a 30, I think it's a 34 or 36, so it looks a little oversized on her. But this sweater is meant to be worn with a lot of ease anyway, so I think that's kind of like the idea. Once it's all finished, washed, and dried, I'll try it on myself just to see. I'm curious what it would be like to wear a kind of oversized sweater and see what it looks like. So let me show you the color work on the inside, because you know your color work should always be just like your cables and everything else. It should be beautiful on the inside just like it is on the outside. So this is how the color work and the floats are laying in this sweater, which I think is pretty cool looking. I had a like tunnel vision effect last night when I was weaving in all the ends. I kind of opened it up and I was staring at the inside, and it was almost like some kind of like Twilight Zone episode with this, or like Star Trek or something, with the stars were rushing at me. But it's I feel like the color work has come out really nicely, and all that's left up here is bound off for the neck, the collar at the base of the collar here, and then this will be worked in the flat, and then a collar will be added to kind of finish the whole thing off. So it's been a fun knit. I've actually really, it's one of these knits where like if you don't feel totally proficient at color work, let's say, this would be a great pattern for you, because you would learn color work by the time you're done. Let's say you're pretty good at it and you just want to practice it a lot. This is a great pattern to practice on because there's no shaping, so you're not having to deal with increases or decreases in the main body part. All you're doing is, once you get past the ribbing, you're just doing your bird's eye pattern. So if you want to practice for hours and hours, working color work with two hands, which is how I do it, or any other way that you want to do it, this is a great sweater to do that on because you're working plain stockinette in the round. You're just practicing your color work. Same with the sleeves. They're knit from the cuff up to the armpit, and then everything is joined. And I think the thing about this sweater, there were a couple things that I'd note. One is that it really does help to keep track of where you are in the pattern, in both when you finish your sleeve and when you finish your body. And I finished them both so that they were on the same line of the pattern. I think that's kind of key, just for the way that the pattern sits and works. The other thing is, by the time you get up to the body, if you're not as confident about doing a pattern like this, where you do have to, when you get to your decreases for your armhole, you are going to have to mess with your where you're placing your colorwork stitches, your contrast color stitches. But you've learned that by working the sleeves, because the sleeves are worked in the round and you are working increases as you go up. So you're kind of having to place your contrast color stitches as you go in a way that kind of isn't always perfectly in pattern in this seam, but just kind of looks good. You know, looks a little spotty and steady. And up here, by the point you're doing these decreases, you're pretty good, because these are all happening in a very regular fashion, so you're not really having to worry about that too much as you do your raglan decreases. So it's a cool sweater that way. And I actually, I think it was this sleeve, when I was deciding on where to place the extra contrast color stitch, I didn't place one where I thought, and then I looked back later, and it was kind of like an open green field right here where it needed to have one in the middle. So I just went in and duplicate stitched. And for those of you who don't know, duplicate stitch, you anchor your yarn in the back, and then you just basically knit over the stitch and make it look like a stitch. So this little white guy right here is sitting on top of a green stitch, but you would never know it, and that's why duplicate stitch is awesome. You probably wouldn't want to do duplicate stitch. I know what you're thinking, right? You're like, well, I could do the whole sweater in duplicate stitch. I wouldn't recommend that. But if you need to fill in an area where, you know, you could have put one but you didn't, well, perfect. You can just duplicate stitch to your heart's content and no one will be the wiser. You do have to be a little careful weaving in ends with a sweater like this, because the white would show behind the green pretty easily, so you want to be careful of that. And you want to be careful when you're working your floats, that if you have a little bit of space in between floats, especially when you're up here on your raglan increases, you want to make sure that you catch your floats as you go. So those are two little things about this pattern. But overall, it's been a really good experience. It's been a really fun knit, and I think that French press knits. I think that Melinda did a good job with the pattern. It is a very simple pattern in terms of shaping and styling, but it's complicated enough if you're trying to learn to work color work, that I think you'd learn a lot from this particular piece. So I'm waiting on one skein of yarn, maybe 1.5 skeins from Wool and Honey, which should arrive in just a day or two, and then I can whip up the top and close up the collar and get it in the bath and get some photographs, hopefully, and send it off to those lovely ladies, and I think they will enjoy it. It's a really beautiful sweater, super warm. When you have an all-over colorwork sweater like this, it's kind of like having an all-over cable sweater. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of fabric, because you have all these floats that create almost an extra layer of yarn, and you're trapping air, and so it's warm. It's going to be a warm ski sweater kind of a thing. But it would be really great if you live somewhere like Michigan, where you have cold winters, or here for that matter, in Illinois. Okay, so that is Lila Now by Melinda Bernardi of French Press Knits. So the next segment is usually from our Rare and Hard to Find book series, but because all my books are kind of locked up at the moment in moving boxes, what I have for you today instead is an article from Scientific American Supplement, which came out in 1891, and it's about the stilt walkers of Londe, France. If you haven't heard about them, and I hadn't heard about them until my friend posted a little news story and shared it with me, they were a bunch of shepherds in Londe, France, and apparently Londe is kind of like it's an area that's kind of marshy, hilly. It's just not, it's like a difficult to traverse kind of terrain. So these shepherds just designed these stilts, and they were about 5 feet long, and they were supported by a sheep bone down at the base, and they would have a crook to kind of use as a tripod so they could kind of sit or rest and be really fairly comfortable. And they were often trained to use these stilts from very young ages, so they were very adept at using these stilts. And they would be able to walk across these marshy areas and this kind of like wild landscape and shepherd their flocks. So I think it's kind of cool. And from up in that perspective of being that much taller, they were capable of kind of seeing better where their flocks were and what was going on. So I thought I would read to you just a little bit from this Scientific American piece, just so that you can get a flavor for it. They called these stilts big legs, and I can pronounce a lot of French, but I can't pronounce the name for the legs, so I'm not going to try. But these, I'll read you just a little bit here. So there were no roads of any kind, and the population, relying upon sheep raising for a living, was much scattered. It was evidently in order to be able to move around under these very peculiar conditions that the shepherds devised and adopted these stilts. The lower part of these stilts, which rests on the earth, is enlarged and sometimes strengthened with a sheep's bone, as I said. And they had these staffs that they could use for numerous purposes. And then the usual costume of them consisted of a sort of jacket without sleeves, made of sheepskin, of canvas, gaiters, and a drugget cloak. And headgear consisted of a beret or a large hat. And this accoutrement was formerly complemented by a gun, oftentimes to defend the flock against wolves, and a stove for preparing meals. So I want to show you a few. There are great photographs, and I'll put a link to the Scientific American article in the show notes. Everyone can go and check that out. But here are some photographs from Mashable, which did a story on these folks. So there's a shepherd with his flock, and let's see. There was one other photograph in here. This is a photograph of a big group of shepherds all wearing their sheepskin coats, smoking their pipes while standing on their stilts. You can see they're using their crooks as kind of tripods to stand there. But some of them are just standing. I think that they became so adept at this that they didn't really need much support. Here's a cute, like kind of cool illustration of someone in Linda's delivering the mail with the stilts on. You can see that image is pretty impressive, right? So they're really great, and this is the cloak that they wore. I'll show you this image here. The cloak that they wore to keep warm, one of the other cloaks, if they weren't wearing their sheepskins. So I thought this whole bit was pretty interesting to learn about, to think about the kind of like becoming a shepherd and being a shepherd in a landscape that would be difficult to walk through and to kind of shepherd your sheep through. So what do? You create stilts, and then you get really good at walking on them, and it helps you be a better shepherd. And so this is Londres, France in 1891 was the Scientific American article. Like I said, I'll put a note in the show notes for you if you want to go check it out. It's available for free through Project Gutenberg for everybody. And I think some of those images are just incredible to look at. So I'll post a few links to those as well. So I promised you guys a little segment on Playbor, and Playbor is play plus labor, and it's often a kind of an academic kind of term that's come about. I encounter it most when I'm studying or teaching about video games, right? The idea that you're doing something that was once play, or something that was in your leisure time, or something that was supposed to be fun, and you've kind of monetized it somehow. So there are people who play lots of video games, and they either they farm gold, they sell characters in the real world to make money, or they're just trying to like be as productive as possible in their video games to earn status or be able to tell other gamers that they, have a such and such character in a video game, or they've made it to such and such a level. So Playbor is kind of complicated in that it's often about taking something that you love or that was once thought of as play or fun or outside the realm of work, and kind of meshing it with work or with labor, or making it into a labor of a different kind. Now, a lot of spinners and knitters will tell you, I'm knitting here, I'm spinning, like this is labor. It's fun, but it's also labor. And historically we know that there were many women and men who were involved in a lot of the craft trades who had to do so to make money for their families or for their own living. So it's a complicated, I think Playbor is a complicated kind of topic to think about, especially in terms of knitting and spinning. But for me, I've been thinking about it because I was doing this sample knit, and I've done a bunch of sample and test knitting of late, and I'm teaching about video game studies in one of my classes, so we're reading a book that's based in sociological thinking about play and labor. And so I was thinking, wow, you know, like, I'm kind of doing that too here. I'm taking something that I love to do in my spare time, something that I would do anyway, and I'm kind of thinking about how it gets monetized or compensated, right? I kind of often tell my husband, Spencer, well, I'd be knitting anyway, so I might as well take on a sample knit or a test knit, because then there's some compensation or some recognition or some, you know, whatever it is, and I get to put it on my Ravelry page, and, you know, it's part of what I'm doing anyway, so I might as well get something else out of it, right? Rather than just a sweater or whatever, the wonderful gratification of knitting and the therapy that it is to sit there and knit, right? But I thought, gosh, if you start thinking about it in Playbor terms, it's actually a little more complicated than that. And I kind of wonder how many of us feel like, as knitters and spinners, how much of what we do is about trying to get recognition for something, or compensation, or to move up a level, or to participate in a knit along or a make along or a crochet along or a spin along. So I'd be really curious to know in the comments if you guys had ever given this any thought. Like, do you knit and spin and crochet like really purely for your own edification? Or is there a part of it that's a little bit like Playbor? That's a little bit like, well, it's play, but, you know, I get compensated over here, or I get recognition over here, and that's kind of one of the reasons that I do it. And I'm kind of curious to know what you guys think about that. I'm kind of hoping to bring Spencer on to talk about this topic in a future podcast. So fingers crossed we'll have some time before the move to sit up here and have a little chat. But for now, I'll just plant the seeds and see what you guys think about it in the comments. So the last little bit for today is the Making Stories giveaway. And you guys will remember from last time around, I became an ambassador for Making Stories. And speaking of Playbor, I'm doing something I love, but there's kind of like a reward involved, which is to get to do a giveaway with you guys for the magazine. Interesting segue, right? So Making Stories is the issue 1 change. It comes from the editors Hannelisa Haferkamp and Verena Kors. And I spoke last time about how this magazine has some really awesome essays in it, and some beautiful patterns, lots of sweaters, a couple of scarves, a pair of socks, and it's just a really gorgeous, pretty magazine. And they're highlighting change, and they're highlighting transparency and sustainability and all these other wonderful things. So I'm super looking forward to seeing the next issue. I'm super looking forward to casting on some of this stuff. And in the meantime, I get to give away this copy to one of you all. So I did a random number generator for, I think we had 53 entries, and the winner is Sue on Ravelry. She is Suanimons. I'm not sure how you pronounce that ID on Ravelry, but I will put it at the bottom of the screen here so you can see yourself. Sue, congratulations on winning this copy. Please send me an email at knittingthestash@gmail.com, and I will get in touch with you about your address and get this in the post to you. So congratulations. And for everyone else, if you didn't win, we always have giveaways on here, so there will be a next time, I promise. All right. It has been wonderful to hang out with you guys. I'm so glad I was able to carve out just a little bit of time this weekend to do this. There were dogs barking, there are people picking up things in the yard, there are friends moving water heaters, there are kids coming and going from soccer and whatnot, but this was kind of like my moment of zen. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful time until I see you again, hopefully in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.